Okay, we're going to move on to the final part of the course now. So really we're into revision techniques, and due to the way that the course has been run, some of the harder bits have been left till the end, and really that's what this video is, or this set of videos is going to be dealing with. In front of you now on the screen are programming techniques, things that you should need to know for your exam. Now, we might not have GCSEs in the summer as they intended, but we may have a mini exam, and your work is also going to be based around teacher assessment. So I want to finish off this course giving you all the information that you need so that you can pass that teacher assessment. And if the mini exam, which I would assume would contain a fair amount of programming, that you could understand the programs that you're given and be able to write some pseudocode yourself. You will not be asked to write anything in Python again, as far as the exam board's concerned. And the programs that I'm going to give you now, you could write them in Python, and I would recommend, if you are thinking about taking computer science or something computer related, maybe games programming, that you do program it in Python. Download Python and have a go with it. I know a lot of you don't have Python installed, that maybe you're only looking at this on a device, and if that is the case, then you can't program what I'm going to do, but you can follow and you can write down on paper to practice some of the things that we're going to go through. So quickly looking in front of you, this is going to finish off what we started in the last lesson, which is basic string manipulation. And it is basic because there's a lot of string manipulation, but really for higher levels, you just need to know a few of the simple things that can be done. And when I say simple, they are hard. But as far as string manipulation, when it's got thousands of routines, we're only going to look at 4 or 5 of them. That's what I mean by simple. And the same goes for the next one down, the use of basic file handling operations. We didn't really go into this much in the course at all, but it will be required. However, it won't form much of the exam. You just need to know how to do it and understand what's happening on the paper in front of you, and we will cover that. But the program that we're going to write is going to be a game, and we're going to use files to actually do that. In fact, we're going to try and use this. We're going to try and use records to store data, and to do that, we're going to use SQL built into Python. Now, I know in the previous set of videos on SQL, I said that we wouldn't touch it in Python, but this is an ideal opportunity for us to have a look at. So we're going to build a game. We're going to build the sort of anagram game. I'll come to that in a minute. But we're going to have a full working version if you're coding, and if you're not coding, an understanding of the full working version, where you play a game and you get a score, you save your score, and then we have a high score table, so who's doing the best, or try and beat your last attempt. And we're also going to have a file of words that we don't keep having to write them in on the keyboard. So maybe we can have a couple of 100 words, maybe I can give you 1,000 words that we can have anagrams, and you can use files to open them and get random words from that file. So it's going to be really, really useful. We're going to use arrays or equivalent lists when we read these records. So we're going to cover this too. We're going to use subprograms, functions and procedures. Now, this is the one thing that I am probably different to quite a few teachers, is that I just do this all the time. But I'm not too sure if you fully understand what functions and procedures are and how they work. And there's one small thing called scope that I wish to teach you about when using functions and procedures. The idea of these really is to write a little bit of programming and then put it to one side, never use it, or never write it again, but just use it. It's called modular programming, and it's how things really work in the real world. So if you are thinking of doing computer science or games programming at higher education level, this is definitely critical to your understanding. And the rest of it we've just covered as a matter of course. So let's get into what we're going to be trying to do. At the end of last term, we looked at this. It said we had an anagram problem. Actually, it's not an anagram. Normally an anagram is a bunch of words. Let me just show you. Let's put a text box in. For example, if I've got the word live, L-I-V-E, then an anagram of live would be evil, using the same letters but compiled in a different order to make another word. Or we could have the word vile. All of those are anagrams. However, this really isn't an anagram because it doesn't make a word. It's just scrambled. And that's what we're going to be doing. We're just going to be scrambling a word and see if you can unpick what the original word was. So to call it an anagram solver, it's not going to create words. We'd need a dictionary to do that, and that's far too complicated for what we need to do. So we're just doing the first steps. We're going to create a word scrambler. That's a better definition of what we're doing. So an example, let's go back through the lesson so that we had this word, fiver, and we scrambled all the letters and we ended up with something. It's not a word, it's just a scramble, but it contains all the letters of the original, just in a different order. That's what we're trying to achieve. So let's think about this in kind of programming terms. If we're going to be looking at this, and this would be called a string, and strings normally have quote marks, but for the benefit of the videos, I'm not going to put quote marks around things. I may do from time to time, but I'm assuming that you understand that these are strings and that they should be, if we're in a program, be placed within quote marks. So we're going to take a look at this and how we can look at each and every single letter and scramble it. So we end up with RFEVI from the word fiver, which we did in the lesson. To begin with, we need to be familiar with indexing. Indexing is the position of the letter in the string. So here we've got F is at position 0. Now indexing always begins at 0 in strings and arrays, unless you are told otherwise. It can happen very rarely in exams. They can say, oh, let's start at 1. But if they don't, assume that it always starts at 0. So the first item is going to be 0, then it's going to move on. The next item is going to be is 1. And it gets kind of complicated because you say that the first item is F, and you tend to think of first item with the number 1. You have to start thinking of it in terms of 0. So if I've got this word fiver, there are how many letters? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, but the index goes from 0, 1, 2, 3 and 4. In other words, it doesn't reach 5 because it starts at 0. Now that's quite important, and we have to remember and work with that. So let's imagine that we've got a random number generator or a dice or something that we can roll which gives us numbers. A dice isn't a very good example here because a dice has always got 6 sides, so it's always going to give me a number between 1 and 6. Here I need a number that is going to give me one of these indices. So I need to be able to pick a random number between 0 and 4. And I'm just going to say that if I had a random number generator and it gave me 2, what it would do is indicate the index 2, which is the third letter, which would be the V in my string. And I've coloured them red so that you can see what I am looking at. Now, if I'm going to scramble my word, what I really need to do is take that V out of there and start a new string, which just has V in it. And then I need to reduce this string, because I've taken a letter out, I need to reduce that down to a new string. And we can see that in the next slide. So here I've now used the word source. Source kind of means original, and that's a variable name, source, and that holds the word F-I-E-R, fire. But the indexing is now only up to 3, 0, 1, 2, 3, because we took the V out and we placed that in a new string, and I've called that new string target. Source and target are two commonly used words in programming. You could use anything you like. You could have called this original and then new if you wanted to. It's completely up to you what you call your variables, but I've used source and target. Now our source, because I've taken the V out, the string is shorter by 1 letter, and so now my numbers only go to 3, which is why I wouldn't use a dice, because I'd always have 6 numbers on a dice, and these are reducing. So each time I do this, my source string is going to reduce and my target string is going to increase. Notice I'm not really bothered about the indexes on the target string. So here's my next one. I do my random number generator again, and it gives me 2 again. But this time the 2 refers to the E in the string, 0, 1, 2, and I've highlighted it in red. So what we need to do is take the E out from this string and place it in my target string at the end. And if we put things at the end, we call that append. And I'll look at that in a little bit more detail, because that's going to be important when we're looking at files. That word append means put on the end of. And it's used a lot in files, so I will use that term to show how this string is being built. So we're taking the E out and we're placing it in our target. We are reducing our source by 1, so now I end up with fur because the E's gone. The E is now in target, and now I've got just my 3 elements in my string, and I've reduced the index by 1, so I've now got 0, 1 and 2. And I continue that process. So the next thing I'm going to do is get a random number from my random number generator. This time it can only pick a 0 or 1 or a 2, and one of these letters is going to appear in my target string and my source string is going to be reduced. So let's take a look at that. So this time I've rolled or generated a 0, because I want to take a look at what happens if we pick the first or the last element. We've got a lot of work to do with this later on what happens if we're looking at the first or last element, because the rules kind of change on what we do. But not too difficult, it's just something for you to be aware of. So this time I've picked 0, and it's the F, so the F has got to be removed from the source string, appended to the target string, that means on the end, and this has to be reduced, which we do in the next slide. There we go. Now I've got 2 items in my list, 0 and 1, still reducing, and my target string is growing. So this time my random generator gives me 1. I'd only got 0 and 1 to choose from. Gives me 1, so I'm going to take the R out and I'm going to append it on my target string, and then my source string is going to be left with just the single element I at position 0. Now, the length of this string is just 1 character, and that's going to be quite important. And I'll talk about that again in a minute. But it's pointless having a random number generator because I've only got 1 number, 0. So that has to go on the end. So I'm going to put the I on the end, append it to my target string, and my source string is now empty, completely empty, no indexes or anything, just empty. And my target string now is the word I started off, which fiver, rearranged or scrambled into a new word. Now the game would be, if I gave you this, VEFRI, would you be able to come up with the word fiver? And if you did, you'd score a point. If you got it wrong, then you'd be given another word to try and guess. And the longer the words, obviously, the harder the anagram. And if you think back to the evil, live, and vile that we started off with, those 4 letters, it could be any one of those, and only one of those is going to be the true word. So that's explained the kind of game concept that we're looking for and how to do it on paper. We need now to start thinking about the pseudocode, or how we would write that down as a computer program on paper. So the next slide, I've got a couple of things. First of all, in blue over here, I've got random. Now, this is pseudocode, so it's not how you would actually write it into Python. We need to change the way we do things. But in pseudocode, this is fine. And a random number has 2 things to it. We need the start value and we need the end value. And so if I was looking at this word fiver, the start value would be the 0 and the end value would be the 4. Okay, so random 0 to 4 inclusive. And that inclusive means include the 4. So we've also got this is part of string manipulation. The length function is part of string manipulation. Excuse me. So this is saying return or find the length of the source string. Well, the source string is fiver, and it's basically just counting the letters. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Has nothing to do with the index. So the length of that is 5. And the point is, if we're using indexes from a 0 base, then we know that actually the indexes that we want are always up to sort of 5 minus 1. So take 1 off because we're starting at 0. So 5 minus 1 gives us our 4. So we know how to generate a random number. That's a value between 0 and 4 inclusive. The length of the source, and I've put minus 1 here, okay, gives me the value 4, because if I want to give it a start value and an end value in my random function, well, the start is always going to be 0, no matter what word I'm looking at. Always going to be 0. But the end, because it's either shrinking or growing, is going to change, and I need a sort of mathematical calculation to work that out. And I know that my end has to be 4, because that's the last index. So I use this piece of code, the length of the source minus 1. Let me just highlight that in red, because if I use that, length of the source is 5, minus 1 gives me 4. I've got my end point. So I put that in my function. So I start off my function with 0. That's the start number. The end number is 5 minus 1, which is 4. That's the end part here. That's a function called random. So how it performs random, we don't really care, as long as it gives us a number, and that would be stored in a variable called random number. So that's how the random number part works and how we can use it. So let's see how it works with our program so far. When we start off with fiver, we've got random number is between 0 and the length of the source. Now I don't put the number 4 in here, because if I did, I'd have a problem. I use variables because it's going to change. So in the very first instance, my last number is the length of the source take away 1. So that's 5 take away 1, which is 4. I have picked me a random number between 0 and 4. But once I've taken my letter out, I'm left with just 0 to 3, or 4 items, but I can still use the same mathematical expression here, because now the length of the source is going to be 1, 2, 3, 4. Take away 1 gives me 3, my last item, so I'd be picking a random number between 0 and 3, and I continue that as I come down. So my random number now becomes a random number between, oops, and that needs stretching out, that needs stretching out. because my random number is now, well, the length of this string is 3 characters. So the length is 3, take away 1, which gives me 2. That's my last index, so I can have a random number between 0 and 2 when I'm at this place, and so on. Now my length is 2. So 2, take away 1 is 1. That gives me my end value here, and so on. But if I took another letter out, the length is only going to be 1. So when I get to this position, I'm finished. Okay, I've got something called a stopping condition. And if I've got a sequence, which is what we've just done, that keeps reducing and reducing and reducing until finally it's only got 1 or 0 things left, it implies that we use a while loop. And in fact, we do need a while loop. So the stopping condition is if the length of the source string, and that should be length, of the source string is equal to 1. So if the length is 1, which it is, we stop. So I'm going to write that in code. So I'm going to say while the length of the source string is more than 1, not equal to 1, more than 1, we do these 3 lines. If it equals 1, because it's reducing each time, it's eventually going to be 1, the loop finishes and we do these 2 lines. So let's see if I can go through and explain what these lines are at the moment. So what we're going to do, while the length of the source is more than 1, so while we've got more than 1 letter, we're going to generate a random number between 0, which is the start, and the length, take away 1. So however long that string is, if it's 20 characters long, we're going to generate a number between 0 and 19, not 20. We're going to take 1 off to get the final index. When we've done that, we're going to append that character that we found at that index to the target string. Remember what we were doing up here. Let's just move it up a bit more. There we go. So we've got the source string, we've got the target string, we're appending what we found at the index to the target string. Then we are going to remove the character from the source string. If we didn't do that, we'd just have an impossibly long word going on with lots of F's, lots of V's, lots of E's, lots of R's. We have to take that character out. And we did that in each case. Let's just go back. So we started off with the V, we took the V out, put it in the target string. Then we had the E, we took the E out, and we put it in the target string. Then we had the F, and we took that out, and we put it in the target string, and so on. So that's what we're doing each time through the loop. Now we're going to continue doing that until we only have 1 letter left, until this is true. The length of the source is equal 1. So this would be no longer true. It's not bigger than 1. It is 1. So that is going to end my loop. Now this is pseudocode, a little bit different to Python, as you notice, because we've got a do here and we've got an end while here. Neither of those words appear in Python. And none of these appear in Python either. This is plain English, or as English as you could get. It's not Python code. We need to convert this to Python code. Anyway, the loop is finished because we've just got 1 character left in our original source string. So what we do is we take that character and we append it to the end of our target string. So just looking down here, I haven't given the target string, so the end would be, well, let me just put that in. Let's insert a text box. So if my target string was VEFI so far, oops, VERI, let's say, and I take that last one out, F, this string would become empty and this string would have that appended on the end. So that's what that line of code is meant to do. And then finally, it says here, set the source string to empty. So in other words, continue what we were doing by removing the character from the string. So the character goes and there's no index, and our job is complete. In other words, at the end of this, we will have ended up with a word which is scrambled. Let's just make that bigger so that you can see it. Okay, so that's the idea behind what we're doing, and I'm going to take this and I'm going to convert that to Python in another lesson. So I should hopefully have produced some exercises for you to do based on this video. Don't forget, you don't need to write Python code. You need to have Python installed on your laptop if you do. But if you're not thinking of a computer science course beyond the GCSE, then just work on paper, just answer the questions on paper, because that's all you'll have to do in the exam. If you're doing a course further, then I would practice very much, particularly downloading the Python, getting it all working, working out your errors, fixing your programs. Useful practice. So on to the next one, where we're going to look at this moving from the words, the pseudocode, to the actual code.